I'm wondering your take on compassionate conservatism, the Bush era effort to recast conservatism, maybe with a more kindly face. It seems to me that, or at least I think that's what President Bush thought that he was trying to do, and some of the other architects of compassionate conservatism. It seems to me that part of that was an implicit acceptance of the argument that you make in this book, which is that we need to reconcile ourselves with some elements of the existing state and not be fighting losing battles about tearing up the welfare state root and branch. I'm wondering your take about how well that went with conservatives, how well they embraced that, and how well, now that President Bush is out of office, the vehemence that you're seeing in response to even further enlargement of the government's role in people's lives, at least on the right, if there's something of a repudiation of that, and what kind of challenge that poses for your thesis.
Yeah. I think a pretty big challenge. I mean, I think compassionate conservatism is, in some respects, George W. Bush's reworking of his father's formulation in 1988 about a kinder, gentler America, his George H.W. Bush's praise of 1,000 points of light. The difference seems to be that for George W. Bush, one difference is that there was a more public sector component. The 1,000 points of light was purely a sort of a private, voluntary things that were going to be praised by public officials, but there were, as I recall, very few programs that actually involved government spending or government involvement with the provision of these. It was an encouragement to people to volunteer, to give money, to give time, and so forth. Whereas compassionate conservatism seemed to be motivated by the somewhat different idea that the government should avail itself of the laudable enterprises being carried out by inspirational figures in the nonprofit sector, people who were running programs in schools and inner city churches and things, and rather than in a top-down bureaucratic sort of way, rely on these people more to trust their judgment, trust their knowledge of things on the ground. And I think the other difference is that George W. Bush came up with this idea a decade after his father had proposed the kinder, gentler America. You recall that in the 1989 inaugural address, George H.W. Bush, sort of in defending this reliance on the nonprofit sector, said the federal government has more will than wallet, a way of saying that we really don't have the resources to help all this. A decade later, the dot-com boom was going on, and of course the thing about booms is that they are booms because people don't think they are booms when they're going on. They think the world is always going to be growing, more prosperous, and that you can found a company, ovenmitts.com, and be a multimillionaire before you're 30 and stuff like that. So the idea was that, well, we're going to have these surprising federal budget surpluses. We'll have them. People really talked this way 12 years ago, as far as the eye could see. The question, we're going to not only have surpluses, we're going to pay off the federal debt. And so, Bush is basically saying, well, we have this money to play with. Here's a good way to play with. Here's a way, and it was a conservative sort of thought in the sense that Bush was and Rove were saying, conservatives have friends who are not the kind of usual social worker sob sisters, but have a rigorous approach to helping people who really need it. Let's start these initiatives to make sure that money gets channeled through these friends rather than through the poverty industry that seeks to perpetuate and constantly tend to the needs of the poor. I think there was, merit and a certain shrewdness in all that, but of course certainly the economic preconditions turned out to be ephemeral rather than something we could count on. And we're in a position now in the year 2010 where it's unimaginable that we'll get back to the kind of point where people were sort of thinking, well, we've got all this money, what can we do with it? That doesn't seem like it's going to be on the national agenda until you and I are, playing with our grandkids, right? And I think, politically, it just, I'm not sure how committed. I'm not sure how committed the second Bush presidency was really to any of their domestic policy ideas. I mean, you think of the Bush presidency, it had this funny beginning because of the Florida recount. So it had, it tried to make up in vigor what it thought it lacked in legitimacy during the first few months. But it seemed haunted by the sense that it wasn't sure what it was supposed to be about. And then 9/11 happened, and then it knew what it was supposed to be about. Right. But what it was supposed to be about had rendered all of the domestic policy concerns a very distant second. And I think the administration really viewed those as things to sort of tend and try to keep them from being problems. I mean, the press is out there, you got to give them stuff, you have to have these talking points. But I don't think that anybody in the last 7 1/3 years of the 8-year Bush presidency really imagined themselves to be there to deal with these kinds of questions. And there, I think a further problem is, and this was really a problem that I think you saw with both Bush presidencies, was that there was a kind of funny rhetorical dereliction of duty. I thought that I mean the country's attention span is shorter, and there are more distractions than there used to be. It's not enough for a president to say something once or to have a slogan and give it a little program. And if you're really committed to something, you have to restate it and defend it regularly. And I think that there were things to be said for both compassionate conservatism and for the ownership society, which in some ways I think comes even closer to the kind of means testing and voucherizing that Paul Ryan and I are talking about. But as a conservative watching the Bush administration, it just felt like that was a box they had to check. That we can't not have a domestic policy and a domestic agenda of some sort. So here it is, and we've given it, we put it out, we've issued the papers, there's the websites, you can go read the stuff, and that's as much as we're really going to invest in this. This wasn't a crazy thing for them to believe under the circumstances, but given that there seemed that they were searching in the months before 9/11 for something for that presidency to be about. Once they had it, they really had it, and they didn't let go, and they didn't invest much in anything else. Mm-hmm.